Monday, November 3rd, 2025. The first order of business on our agenda is to read the City of Wausau public comment statement. The statement goes as follows. The City of Wausau recognizes the value of public comment on local issues and the importance of allowing members of the public to express themselves on city matters. Please identify yourself by name and state your address. Each statement made by a participant should be limited to 3 minutes. Direct all comments to the chair, not to members, staff, or other participants. People addressing the council shall not disrupt the orderly course of business. The chair values civil discourse and may interrupt, terminate, or prohibit public comment that does not adhere to these rules. The next item on our agenda is comments and suggestions from pre-registered citizens. Just a reminder that tonight is a committee of the whole. The committee of the whole does not make any final decisions on anything. The committee of the whole will only make a recommendation to the Wausau Common Council to decide whatever items are pushed forward at a future meeting. So the committee of the whole is a tool that we use in a less formal setting, in a committee setting, whereby we can share and obtain information and learn about an issue that is usually of wide interest that doesn't fit neatly into the mission of one of our standing committees. So we began this particular discussion last month and then decided that we would hold one more session after we all had some chance to network within our districts and talk with our neighborhood groups and that. Since then, all the neighborhood groups have met, so that feedback should be available. We'll begin with our pre-registered citizens. We have one, Kathy Strasser. Kathy, if you'd like to come up and give us your comments.
Good evening, Council. I have met some of you and not all of you, so thank you for taking my comments. I'm Kathy Strasser, 1612 Green Vistas Drive in Wausau, and I have the privilege of serving as the president of the Police and Fire Commission. First, I want to thank the members of the Wausau Fire Department, who obviously many are here tonight, some are not. But thank you. Thank you for responding to our community, which are often the worst days of our lives. So thank you. Since joining the commission in 2018, I've watched our fire and police departments, both deeply committed to the people they serve, grow stronger through deliberate hiring, training, and leadership. Over these years, I've had the opportunity to speak with many of our firefighters. They want to serve well. They want to go home safe. And they can't do either without enough people to respond. I recognize how hard this moment is for the City Council and the Mayor. The budget is tight and the choices are tough. Regardless of how this discussion goes tonight, this council and administration, we ask that you please come together to make the hard choices that keep Wausau safe, strong, and financially stable. Referendums cannot be our only go-to solution for every shortfall, and public safety cannot be the only part of the budget under the microscope simply because it was funded with a grant. Every department, every service, and every dollar deserves the same level of scrutiny and leadership. Our residents expect and deserve collaboration, discipline, and decisions rooted in what's best for our entire community. At the same time, we can't lose sight of what's at stake. The staffing and resources that allow our firefighters to respond when it matters most. On our worst days, and we will all have our worst days. As leaders, we all share the same goal, a safe, strong, and financially stable Wausau. The path forward won't be easy, but it demands unity, courage, and common purpose. Please, as a community member, I ask, let's work together to make decisions that protect both our fiscal health and our community safety. Thank you, and thank you all for serving our community.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. That is the only registered public comment that we have for the evening. With that, we have a couple of presentations. I guess I would like to begin before we get to the presentations by thanking our fire department workforce that has turned out tonight to hear our remarks and hear this discussion. Clearly, it's obvious that you all care about it as much as we do, so thank you for coming tonight and for joining us. We appreciate your service. The first presentation we have is from Fire Chief Jeremy Kopp on contributing factors and considerations on maintaining current staffing within Wausau Fire. And I believe Chief Kopp has both a PowerPoint and a video that he would like to present with his materials. Welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate everybody's time this evening and appreciate the opportunity to give this presentation. Thank you so much to Commissioner Strasser and Alder Rasmussen for thanking our firefighters for being here. I wanted to take a moment to do similar, and I wrote some notes as I found out they would be here in the numbers tonight. And I just want to say to all of them that as a chief, you know, I have the privilege of leading some of the most dedicated, courageous, and selfless men and women I've ever known. You know, this isn't a job, this isn't a career, it's a calling. Every firefighter takes an oath, they raise their right hand, and in that oath, they swear to protect lives and property of others, even at the risk of their own life. Think about that for a moment. There aren't many professions in this world where your daily duty might include putting your own life in harm's way so that someone else can live. When the alarm sounds, our firefighters don't hesitate. They don't stop to wonder who's in trouble or whether or not the danger is too great. They go because that's who they are. It's what they dedicated their lives to doing. And what's remarkable is that they don't see themselves as heroes, but I do. Every time I watch them train, every time I see them return from a tough call, every time I hear them talk about the people that they've helped, I'm reminded that this profession is built on heart, courage, and an unshakable sense of duty. To the men and women of the fire department that are behind me tonight and the ones that couldn't be here, I want to say thank you for your bravery, your sacrifice, and your unwavering commitment to this community. You make me proud every single day to serve as your chief. Thank you. So you all received in your packets a memo from me, as well as the PowerPoint that we'll go through. And what I'd like to do is just give a little background to our department, how we respond in the difficulties and some of the things we do day in and day out. So if I could have Caitlin move to the first slide. I guess the next one. So right here you can see that we tried to illustrate how our staffing model has been for the past 50, almost 54 or 55 years without an increase in personnel. And what you can see is our job has become increasingly difficult, and what we have is a minimum staffing there. And what you can see is we'll start with Station 3 on the right. As you can see, there's 2 firefighter paramedics that are assigned to an ambulance, and there's a lieutenant and an engineer that's assigned to the engine. What you saw 3 years ago was it's becoming increasingly difficult for us to cross-staff our ambulances, our engines, because our ambulance calls numbers are so high, which means that we're only responding with 2 people out of some of these stations, Station 2 and Station 3 specifically. So you can see in that staffing model for Station 2 and Station 3, it's exactly the same. What you'll see with Station 1 at the top with the fire engine and the ambulance, it's the exact same staffing. And what gets tricky and kind of hard to believe and hard to understand is in that station on Grand Avenue, we also have another ladder truck, a rescue truck, and another ambulance, which is our backup ambulance. That 4th ambulance has seen more and more calls to duty than it ever has in the past, year to year. And what happens is those 2 firefighter paramedics that are there, an engineer and a firefighter paramedic is what I should say, put their gear in one garage where those 3 rigs are stationed, and depending on the call, that's what they determine they're going to climb on to respond to that emergency. If it's a fire, they're going to get on a ladder truck. If it's a car accident, they're going to get on the rescue truck. If it's a 4th ambulance with the other 3 ambulances already being out, which is often, you're becoming more and more often, I should say, they get on the ambulance and then they go out on that call. That leaves the other two rigs empty until someone can return or staff that rig. And then what you see in the bottom is the battalion chief. They drive the command car. That is the one chief in our department that works shift work with the boots on the ground, men and women. And they're in charge of all emergency scenes, making sure they're making decisions on how we provide our operations and care to our patients. as well as how we're going to attack a fire, whether it's offensive or defensive. One thing that I forgot to put into this this slide was years ago, and I'm having trouble finding when it was, but I believe it was when we built Central Station on Grand Avenue in the late 60s. We used to respond out of 4 stations, and at that point we decided to build a big enough station, from what I can understand, to respond out of 3 stations. I think that's important to understand too, that we were doing it with less calls, with this amount of people staffing 4 departments. We also embarked on a very important initiative in 2003, and that was to become a paramedic level service, to provide better care to our patients, to our people of the city of Wausau and to the surrounding communities. It wasn't an easy initiative. It took a lot of hard work. It took a lot of teamwork between the men and women and boots on the ground, and as well as the management staff, to make this happen. And it cost the city some money, and it was worth it. And it's become one of the things that we're known for, is some of the greatest care in the state of Wisconsin, and probably further. And our numbers have shown it with some of the numbers I've presented to you all in the past when it comes to cardiac saves compared to the national average. Unfortunately, the department has stagnated in staffing, apparatus, and infrastructure, while at the same time continuing to grow in responsibility, skill sets, and programs delivered to meet community needs. That means we're busier than we've ever been. We're doing more in the back of an ambulance and on scene than we ever have. We're on scene longer to provide better care, to better prepare the patient for the hospital. And we're also doing things in fires that we didn't have time to do before, and that's when we've got different sort of combustibles in our fires nowadays compared to years ago, where the fires are more dangerous, they're growing faster, and the buildings are failing a lot quicker than they used to. As you all saw in the chart that I provided to you in the memo, this is how we've been responding for the past 50 plus years, and it's used to work somewhat well when we had smaller call volumes. The hybrid cross-staffing that I explained to you with Station 1, we've been asking for help from neighboring ambulances more often because we're unavailable to staff that 4th ambulance. That means we're calling for mutual aid from other departments such as Safer and Riverside to handle our 4th ambulance call in the city of Wausau. That also means, unfortunately, that without any fault of their own, it's a longer response time. It's longer to get to a patient because they're waiting for them to come from another community. The increasing call volume and the stagnant staff levels directly correlate to the survivability of individuals in the community experience a fire or medical emergency, which is kind of what I just spoke to. Caitlin, if you could go to the next slide. So you can see with the staffing numbers that we tried to make with this SAFER grant back in 2022, February 22 when it started, this was the staffing model that we were shooting for. Unfortunately, at the time, we were struggling with, recruiting firefighter paramedics, just like all fire departments across the nation. So it became one of those things where it was very difficult for us to find the people to fill the seats and to fill the new staffing requirements that we had. We were already 6 behind the 8 ball when we added 12, which means we had to get 18 firefighter paramedics. And here in 2025, I'm proud to say that we finally did it. We got creative, we found different ways to do it. And when we did that, a lot of different communities were looking at us for guidance and asking us how we did it, and stole some of our material and some of our plans to make that happen for their own communities. So when you look up there, you can see that Station 3 and Station 2, this would put 3 people on a fire engine. And one of the things I failed to mention in the first slide is when we look at an engineer, the engineer isn't somebody that's able to just jump out and help the lieutenant pull hose or make entry into a fire. That engineer is responsible for pumping water, securing a water supply from a fire hydrant or some other sort of water source, and making sure that they're running the engine to keep our firefighters safe, because without a water supply line, it's basically your lifeline, right? So that engineer is stuck with their fire engine throughout the call from start to finish. So what you see in the next slide with the new staffing is that it would put 3 firefighters on a fire engine, an engineer, a lieutenant, and a firefighter paramedic. This gives us the capability with our ambulances being gone so often that they can make an interior attack, they can set up ground fire applications quicker, and they can maybe make a rescue or save property or people's belongings in a safer and more efficient manner. Most critically, the engine company with 3 personnel allows the lieutenant and the firefighter paramedic to initiate an immediate interior attack. That's our bread and butter in order to save property and lives in the city of Wausau. By increasing staffing levels, the department not only enhances operational effectiveness, but also safeguards our personnel and the community we serve. The ability to act decisively and immediately upon arrival can mean the difference between containing a fire or losing an entire structure, and more importantly, between life and death. Benchmarks used for comparison and analysis are the NFPA, the National Fire Protection Agency, which we use their recommendations and their guidelines day in and day out every day when it comes to anything such as our response times, our station layouts, and our equipment on our trucks. We also follow the Insurance Service Office, which is ISO, which you saw in the packet, and some of the goals that I had when I became the chief and where I wanted to get with the ISO rating, which is becoming increasingly difficult. And as well as the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, which has a lot of background and a lot of studies that help fire departments understand where they need to be with their call levels, and their staffing levels. So with that, I think I'll ask Caitlin to go to the next slide. And in this graph, it kind of gives you a quick and easy overview of what we've been doing since the 70s and where we finally got to in late 2025 here. And I'll be honest, that's a little deceiving because we're counting on our apprentices passing their test in the next couple weeks, right? They're all going to become paramedics and they're going to count towards our staffing level with the goal of reaching the new staffing levels and responding with our units out of the 3 stations a little differently come January 1st of 2026. A really good example of that was not very long ago. We had a fire at the Gaslight Motel. You might have heard that we were there a couple weeks ago. We had the apprentices that were working that day. We also had the opportunity to have a little bit more staff at the station to help that crew respond to that fire, including myself. I had the privilege to work next to the men and women that I kind of missed doing when I was the battalion chief. And they did an incredible job on stopping that fire, saving lives. We were faced with a lot of questions. We didn't know how many of the units were full. We didn't know if there was people living in there. There's been reports that some homeless were taking refuge there. They were under transition from one management owner to another. So the new management team had never set foot in that building yet and had no idea what was going on as I was talking to them on the scene as to how many people were even living there or even paying rent. So we needed to make some decisions and we needed to attack a fire really quickly. We had enough staffing that night, fortunately, to put 2 people in the fire and have 2 people backing them up, which is a standard that we use that every fire department uses across the nation. It's called 2 in, 2 out. We also had 2 people working on a ladder on the gable end of the building at the same time, and we also had 2 firefighters on the roof cutting a trench in order to stop the fire from moving across the attic. This fire had spread from one unit on the first floor. When we pulled up, it was blowing flames over the roof from outside the door. It had burned through the floor and it was extended into the basement where there is a tavern. And it also got up into the attic. So we had a lot going on. We decided to call mutual aid. But fortunately, the men and women here worked hard enough, fast enough, and kept each other safe to be able to put that fire out. We did unfortunately have to transport 1 patient with some smoke inhalation concerns. But other than that, no firefighters were hurt and no one else was hurt other than the 1 patient sent to the hospital. So I think it speaks volumes as of late, is even having the extra staffing for fighting a fire we had with the apprentices, that we could do these things without giving away one or the other to do another. Meaning, if we would have had to take 2 people off the ladder, that operation wouldn't have been done. If we would have had to take 2 people off the roof in order to put people inside, that operation wouldn't have been done and would have been delayed. So once we had mutual aid arrive on scene, we got another call for a fire alarm at Wausau Hospital. Aspirus Hospital, I should say. And when that fire alarm came in, we were neck deep in operations, and fortunately enough, we had mutual aid on scene, and we were able to ask them to respond to our fire alarm at Aspirus Hospital while we continued operations at the Gaslight Motel. That's just one example that I wanted to share with you guys, just because it was very recent, and it showed dividends just having that many personnel available to fight that fire. We also have an automatic aid agreement with SAFER. And that's whenever we get a structure fire, they send an ambulance. Their ambulance was there to transport that patient so that we could keep our firefighters doing fire ground operations. So that's kind of what that graph shows. I think the one on the right shows you our calls for service. It's only growing. We anticipate by the end of this year being over 7,000 calls. And other than the COVID year, every year we grow in call volume. And with that growth in call volume, like I said earlier, we're also spending more time on our fire scenes and on our EMS scenes, which takes us out of service a little bit longer. Next slide. One thing that I'd really want to add is I talked about the creative ways that we got to this point, and over the last 5 years, I've been heavily involved in trying to find ways to staff our fire department. And as we've done it, there's also a cost with that, right? And I think this slide kind of shows you a little bit of what we've done. We've spent $177,000 with our additional positions for supplies, radios, lockers, clothing, et cetera, tuitions, books, spending time and effort with them to make sure that they know what their expectations are, to making sure we give them the tools to succeed and to pass and to lead their class. And both times that we've done this, we can brag about that the Wausau firefighter apprentices have led their class when it comes to grades and getting done in a timely manner. So we appreciate everything our men and women have done to support our ideas, our apprenticeship programs, and to help get us to this point. So, you know, all these things have a cost with it, time and effort and money, and I think that's important to think about. As we move into the remaining slides, you can see we're not the only community who's been affected by these challenges. I think we can kind of just skip through these slides a little quick because you've all seen them, but the first one's Caledonia. They had to go to referendum for 6 firefighters and 8 police officers. The next one would have been Germantown, 4 police and 10 firefighters. The next one was a referendum for 14 firefighter paramedics in Portage. That was a challenge they embarked on. They did not have an ambulance service before this, and they went into this as a firefighting department only, and now they also have ambulances. The next slide is Stevens Point. Much like us, they haven't had a staffing increase in a long time, since 1982. Ours has been even longer, and they also increased their staffing, I think it was by 9 firefighters. Yeah, it's right at the top. So next slide. Monona, they did a $3 million one-time referendum in order to increase their budget and to provide personnel. Next one, Fitchburg. This one's pretty unique. Deputy Chief Plus and myself had a unique opportunity to spend some time in Fitchburg for a weekend. We were there for an apprenticeship get-together. We both were past apprentices in Fitchburg in a different life, not at the same time, but at a different time, which is kind of a neat stat, right? But we were there and we talked to their management team, and they feel that this referendum would have passed if it wouldn't have been so confusing to the people of the community with all the different positions they were trying to add. As you can see, they were looking for an HR generalist, a finance manager, and some other positions, communication specialists, as well as 5 police officers and 6 firefighters. And it was still a very close vote. Racine, much like us, received a SAFER grant, went to referendum to continue on with keeping that staffing. And you can see the property tax increase they did, and they went for a $1.5 million levy increase, very similar to what we're looking at right now. Whitewater also did a levy increase for police and fire. I'm not sure how many. That was the only data I could find for $1.3 million. And that is the end of the slides up front. Some of the other notes that I had written, I've already covered. And one thing, you know, I talk a little bit about 2021, and some of you were here and some of you weren't. Some of you might remember this, but I think this is a good time if the Madam Chair would allow me to play a short video that Chief Bartek at the time had presented to this council in order to talk about the need for 12 additional firefighters. And I think I've probably repeated some of it, but I think it's a good reminder to what we were posed with and what we were looking at as a group of city leaders back in late 2021.
I think it is important to recognize how we got to this point. You know, there's been a lot of, I guess I would say, discussion out in the community about the need initially and how we got to this point. I have been fortunate to be Wausau's Public Health and Safety Chair since 2010. And on a few occasions, I've had the opportunity to take multiple councils on tours of our firehouses, most recently last year. our council toured all 3 firehouses. And we sat, one thing I love to do with our councils is go down to Central Fire and share a meal with the fire crew. And one thing that we all notice and that we make sure to point out is that painted on the wall above the door, as you sit around their dinner table, which is a family-style dinner table, are the words, "Everyone goes home." And the first time I sat and had dinner with them, that was the one takeaway that I found really, really important. Public safety is dangerous business. And so that's why we're here tonight. We have some decisions to make. They're not easy decisions, but I think it's important that we remember that the key message that we have to take away from any of our decision-making is everyone goes home. Not only is it dangerous business, but the community depends on that rapid response. Like, they don't have time to wait, when they're having that worst day ever that our Police and Fire Commission chair responded or described. So I'm glad that you found that video. That video began in Public Health and Safety, which is where we first saw it. I was hopeful that you would be able to find it because it does speak to what understaffing looks like. As one of our units luckily had Ethan, our videographer, on board the night that it happened, and he was able to capture the struggle of getting water on a fire when there aren't enough people. So I guess if we want to go ahead and cue that up, and we can share that video.
Why the Wausau Fire Department needs additional staffing. It is a house fire that occurred on 11th Street North in early November. By happenstance that night, the city videographer
Retired Chief Bartek's probably watching right now, wondering
I
why
was
we
going to
froze
say,
his
he'd be
face
so
there.
glad that we froze him in that exact position. But I will say, I don't doubt that he's watching from home. I have not, in my tenure here,
Department was able to
met any
arrive very
police and
early.
fire leaders that this wasn't really important to.
About to watch is a perfect case study for why the Wausau Fire Department needs additional staffing. It is a house fire that occurred on 11th Street North in early November. By happenstance that night, the city videographer was doing a ride-along with the city police department and was able to arrive very early on to capture these very dramatic images. We want you to watch the video, and at the end I'm going to discuss why it highlights the importance of additional firefighters for our city. If you look at the images within it, In the very beginning, their first arrival on the fire, you see a single firefighter, that's a lieutenant on the first arriving engine, pulling a 2.5-inch hose line that should take 3 firefighters to handle and deploying it by himself. You see other firefighters that are arriving on actually the 3rd due ambulance for that fire, racing up the street to get there to assist because they know the first 2 arriving engines didn't have any firefighters. And then the scene develops as other companies get free from what they're doing and make it to the scene. And finally, we have enough firefighters on that scene of that fire to make extinguishment. The whole time the fire, because it's a very exterior fire coming out of the garage, is threatening the neighboring home with the heat coming from it. And you can see in the last images how the siding on that neighboring home is melted. On another portion of the film, you see our firefighters entering the coal black smoke to go to the interior of the fire to make the true attack and to make sure that all people were evacuated. Luckily, at this time when this fire occurred, everyone is evacuated from the home. But it highlights the problems that we have with staffing inside of our department. And that if we did have people interior to that fire that we needed to make a rescue on, we didn't have enough available firefighters because our firefighters are busy doing EMS calls. The reason that the firefighters weren't on the initial arriving engines was because we do a cross-staffing configuration where we use the firefighter paramedics from the ambulances to be the firefighters on the engines. And unfortunately, at the time that it arrived, Engine 1 and Engine 3's firefighters were already engaged in EMS calls on the city ambulances. And so no immediate firefighters were available for that. And it's becoming more and more common in what we do as we get busier and busier every year. I think that the video is a good case study for us to communicate to the community. We're very lucky in the fact that we had the city videographer capture such dramatic images and such high quality images for us to share with the community. And I think that it's a good case study in the fact that no one was hurt, that no firefighters were injured, no civilians were injured. But of course we worry of a higher acuity event would occur in similar circumstances, what might happen. So thank you for tuning in and watching this. We appreciate you and appreciate your support.
I show that not because I couldn't do the same thing, but we were fortunate enough to have the videographer there, and it was a very dramatic, as far as having good video taking on one of our fires, which we don't have that always have that opportunity to have, but to show it again and to remind everybody of where we were, 3 years ago, where we're at now. And I would add that fire was on the west side of town, where Station 2 isn't as close to the other 2 stations like Station 1 and Station 3 are. We were fortunate there where those 2 stations can get there pretty quick. If that fire is on the west side of town, even say at my house on 32nd Avenue, which is close to Station 2, we're going to be waiting for Station 1 and Station 3 to get there, which sometimes can be, a 4 to 6 minute transport depending on traffic, time of day, and those sort of things. So with our goal of increasing our staffing at Station 2 in January of 2026, they'd be able to make that attack more efficiently than just one lieutenant trying to pull a 2.5-inch line and wrestle it, and the engineer get it charged by himself waiting for the ambulance crew to show up. It's a little different if the ambulance is on scene, then we can cross staff again and they would have 3 people on that fire engine, but that's not always the case, and we can't always guarantee that because of how many ambulance calls we respond to every year. So
Thank you for that. I think that it, I guess, bears repeating. We'd had some discussion about this in public health and safety over the years. It's eye-opening for any public officials to get to not only witness the work that's done by our fire and EMS personnel, but to actually engage with that work. There's times that our council has been invited to observe training fires. There's been other times, and I want to say most recently, well, in 2011 first was the year I did it. There was a workshop called Fire Ops 101, where we got to embed with the crew, put on the gear, and go into those scenarios, both fire and EMS and rescue. I will say that in that moment, that was one of the scarier experiences that I'd ever had, but it was an eye-opening experience to see the work that they do and what it takes to do that job and just the danger level. And I had trained firefighters on both sides of me. Later, that same type of workshop was offered down in Madison. I believe it was in Middleton. And at the time, former Mayor Rosenberg and then former Alder Doug Denny was able to go. The 2 of them were able to take part in that day-long workshop. Also coming back to report that was some pretty eye-opening work that takes place. So, there's that. In 2022, we passed that resolution to accept the grant and add those firefighters 9-0. Because we, at the time, understood the value of proper staffing and the danger that comes without it. So I think that's important also to recognize. But the other thing is we cannot continue to rely on mutual aid. Mutual aid and box alarms are great when we absolutely need them, but we cannot rely on them continuously because the utilization of that service or that contract takes critical emergency response professionals and equipment out of those other communities, some of which are way smaller than us. They don't have 4 ambulances in the first place. And so when we take one, they're short then, and so I think those are just the things that along the way here have concerned me. Very eye-opening to see one firefighter trying to get water on a fire and trying to control that hose. And I'm glad that Chief Bartek pointed out in the video that that's a very different outcome if there's people trapped in that home. Because you got to make a choice then. You can't make entry without water. You're one person, right? So those were the things that I found concerning when I saw that video in the first place, which is why I asked you to bring it tonight, because I know that we have not all seen that. So I think that's a very important piece. Council members, do you have any questions at all for Chief Kopp? Go ahead, Lou.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief Kopp, this here, on the last page, it says, what would be our consequences if we are 8 firefighters short as suggested in this budget? What's the consequences?
That's a very good question. Appreciate you asking that. So anytime that we're shorthanded and we're not responding to maybe like NFPA standards where it says that any structure fire should have 18 firefighters on scene initially in order to provide a good interior attack to save lives and to operate safely as firefighters on scene without getting firefighters hurt. That's exactly what the consequences are. The consequences are people losing, important belongings to them that they want us to save, pets, life safety of the citizens that might still be trapped in the home, and us trying to do more with less where firefighters get hurt. The brothers and sisters that are behind me right now, I think, I talked to you guys a lot about us used to be a stepping stone department and now we're a destination department. I think you see that morale has changed. They're here in support of each other. They don't always get along with each other, right? But they know that they're going to have each other's back no matter what. So we can make sure that at any time, anyone who's next to you is going to make sure that you go home the next day and help each other make it through any difficult scene that we might be on. So I think those are the common things that you're going to hear from us, tell you that it's about safety, it's about life preservation, and it's about saving property.
Okay, and because when I was at home today, just for out of the blue, I kind of Googled what kind of scenario, how many firefighters and paramedics should a city of 40,000 people have that's responding to 7,000 calls a year, and it says 60 to 80. So we're right within that ballpark, and that's why I'm just curious. We're at, I believe, 74 right now. Is that?
Well, we hope to be January 1st. Yeah, I mean, we are with the 6 apprentices.
Okay, so what is our current staffing there?
Well, so 6 apprentices, we're at 68 that count towards our staffing daily, and then with the 6 apprentices, we'll be at 74, which is what our goal is.
So
the
yeah,
minimum
so
staffing.
if we get rid of 8 without the apprentices, we're down to the bare minimum.
Correct.
And then again, of course, it said Google said every situation is different. So thank you for your time. Thank you, and thank you all for coming and showing up, and thank you for this presentation.
So I guess just to expand on Alder Larson's question, originally when we had added those 12 firefighters, if we were to take a matrix that we saw and look at salvaging 4 and cutting 8, my understanding is if you're running 3 crews in 3 stations, 4 isn't enough to move the needle from where you were in 2021. I mean, you don't have enough to run extra apparatus if you don't have extra people on each shift in each crew, right? I mean,
In each station?
yes, that is
That's how we derived with the 9 firefighters, and then after more communications and more talks, we talked about 4 in order to cover vacation slots and different things like that in order to keep our overtime costs down.
That was a question because we were grappling with overtime whenever we had vacation, injury, or illness, right? I mean,
Correct.
and that's how we got to 12. We began with 9,
Yep.
and we ended up with 12. So at the very minimum, 9 is what it takes to move the needle on the apparatus end of things. And that's if we're willing to bear overtime for the other problems, right? I mean,
Right.
in terms of the raw numbers. My concern is that letting the public think that 4 is some number that fixes things actually takes us back to where we were before we had, the problem is when you have 2 ambulances out, which is pretty much all the time, and then the engine call comes, there is nobody to take that out and run it, and even if it gets to the scene, there's not enough people to get the water
Set it up
moving,
properly.
right? That is where we were backed in we were really, I felt like up against a wall on the staffing level to find a way to move that needle in 2022. And so that's why it took so many to get there, right?
Correct. And, we talk about the overtime at the fire department, it can be a pretty large number, and in order to keep that number down, that's another reason we talked about 12. It would give us the staffing, and it would pay for itself essentially in the overtime savings that we would have. And I would predict in 2026, we're going to show a pretty substantial savings in overtime, just because it's going to be the first time in 5 or 6 years we're not, mandating on a daily basis almost.
Okay. Alder Lukens.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So with extra overtime or all of that overtime, I would guess that risk of injuries rises too with the more overtime. I don't know if people are tired, but one thing I'm wondering if you could speak about is the ISO ratings and how that works and how that benefits the public, because I think that's really important. And is that firefighters? Is it firefighters and paramedics, or, how does that work, please?
Yep.
Thanks.
So the ISO rating looks at a lot of things, and every department across the nation is ranked from a 1 to a 10. At the moment, I believe there's 11 departments in the state of Wisconsin that are rated at ISO 1, and you have to meet a whole lot of different benchmarks, and that goes all the way from the water department and scheduling, flushing fire hydrants, to how many people are on an engine, how many people are on an ambulance, how many people we have working on any given day with the population that we have. And I think that packet was sent today, maybe late, that talks a little bit about what those requirements and what those goals are. As far as some of that goes, I did make a phone call to our ISO rep today, and I thought it was pretty funny. I was asking them about what we would look like with our ISO rating if we were to do it in 2025 compared to 2024. They want to do they do their site visits every 5 years, but you can call them more often if you think you're going to improve, and you could do another one sooner than 5 years. And I spoke to him about a few different things as far as if our rating would drop or not. We're dangerously close to being an ISO 3 right now. Matter of fact, we did miss the 2 rating by 3.5 points. They did put us on a work improvement plan to keep us in the ISO 2 category. There are different rates for our homeowners and for our business owners when the ISO rate drops or climbs. And of course, if your ISO rating, and I printed it out today and I left it on my desk, but if your ISO rating's a 10, obviously that's going to be the highest you're going to pay in some premiums depending on what insurance company you use. And Alder Rasmussen could probably speak to some of that too here in a minute. But what we're looking at is staying in a 2, and I asked him about if our staffing stays where it's at. He said that we do an incredible amount of training in order to keep that number high enough to where we got to a 2, because we used to be a 3 up until I think it was 10 years ago. And we got to a 2, and obviously my goal is to become a 1. But he said that with staffing anything less than what we're looking at for 3 people per engine, he said he would find it very hard to see us continuing on as a 2 and be more comfortable as a 3. That doesn't mean we can't do it. There's options to get that done, but it would be a struggle, and we'd be doing it by the skin of our teeth, so to speak, as far as staying as a 2. So, and different things go into that. A training facility is one that you've heard me talk about. And staffing, the water department, our dispatch center, there's some things they can do, but of course they're restricted with money they have in order to install new software and do different things that would help that rating also. So it's not just the fire department, it's not just the staffing, it's a whole array of things, even going down to our fire prevention department and what we do in the public and how many homes we see and how many smoke detectors we put in and how many school prevention programs we do. So all that stuff factors into that rating.
Thank you.
Glad you brought that up because it's important to recognize that in the industry, in the fire insurance industry, the protection class 10 that Chief Cop referred to is essentially unprotected. Most departments that respond with volunteer-based departments rank somewhere between 5 and 7, depending on their response times and the distance people have to come to get to the station and get out after the call. Wausau was a 3 for a really long time, like you said. The upgrade to 2 caused a reduction in property insurance rates in our area for most insurance carriers, for businesses, commercial, and for homeowners. If we end up back at 3, that rate goes up again. So, I mean, that really is just based on the effectiveness of suppression services. So I'm glad you mentioned that. We had a couple others in queue to speak. Alder Tierney and then Alder Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, you had mentioned overtime, and did you expect to see your overtime drop with your additional firefighters that you had on this year, or were you not expecting to see a drop until next year?
No, because like I said, our 6 apprentices don't count towards our staffing until they get their paramedic license. So that's essentially 6 positions that we were filling but didn't count towards our staffing, so that didn't really alleviate the overtime for 2025 as much as we would see in 2026 when they are part of the staffing requirements.
But didn't you have other, besides the 6 apprentice, additional firefighters?
Yeah, we grew, we got to our goals and got to those numbers and hired firefighter paramedics, and yeah, I don't have the numbers available, but I would say that our overtime was probably down in I shouldn't say this because I don't know for sure, but in 2025 compared to 2024, no?
No, actually, I have the overtime hours from 2022 forward. And year-to-date, through September, you were at 364,694, so just
this year?
teetering below 400. 2024, you were high. You were at 493,000, but 2023, you were at 378,000, which I'm sure you're going to surpass this year. So that was a little concerning to me, knowing that you had more staff on than you did in 2023, but yet your overtime is going to be most likely more than that.
And the variables that go to that is not only vacation, but when, employees have babies, when there's injuries, which, we've had our share of injuries, unfortunately, some pretty long ones, and we've seen some tough times. I mean, I think, you talk about the past 2 years and even the past couple months, our firefighter paramedics, have been asked to do a lot. They've been mandated when they don't want to come in. They've been working their hunting seasons, their holidays that they're supposed to be off and away from their families. And sometimes there's just things that you can't avoid, and that's some of those things as far as health goes and that. And I think if you look back to COVID, that was a telltale sign of when our department was really struggling and having to do a lot of overtime, right?
Yeah, I didn't go back there. I was just looking at what the difference was in 2025 with some of the additional staff on versus the prior years when you didn't have it. And I was surprised. I didn't think it was going to be equal or above some of those previous years. So that still concerns me a little bit because with more people, you still have
there's
not
always
made a big
risk,
dent
right?
in
There's
the
always a
overtime
chance
at
of
all.
injuries or babies and that sort of thing. But
That's going to be
hopefully-
true next year too.
Right. But I'd be hopeful, because we haven't been fully staffed in 5 to 6 years, that being fully staffed in 2026 would change that, because we'd have that extra spot available.
Thank you.
The 12 versus the 9 is what you're talking about.
Right.
That extra, those
That extra 4
extra
spots per
3
crew.
were the overtime solution, right? So,
Correct.
I see. Okay. Alder Watson.
So since I guess we have accepted the grants, I know you've been trying to fill those positions, those 12 positions, but it's not like you've gotten all 12 people in right away. Do you know like the staffing levels since 2021 it was 61, and then when did you like fully get all 12?
just now, this
Just
year
now,
with the 6
right?
apprentices, yeah.
Okay, so do you know, like, maybe I can ask you later too, but like, just for numbers, because I should have asked you before the meeting, sorry, but just how many people were at, like, full-time FTEs? I can probably look back at the budgets too for 22, 3, and 4, just to see how that changes, because then it would make sense why maybe overtime hasn't changed if we haven't had those positions full. So
Well,
they're
like,
just,
like I said, in 2022, we were actually, with the 12, we were 18 positions short. We were in a bad way.
minus 18 positions. So you were shooting for like the 74, and you were
Correct.
down 18 in 2022, and then, so you haven't been fully staffed until January.
Well, even then,
Hopefully,
we
knock
still
on
needed to hire a couple more firefighter paramedics early on this year. And I would say that with our last hire, which was, and I should have this, but probably just a month or two ago, with our last 2 hires, that got us to that 74 mark.
So it just, and then that also includes the apprentices?
Yes.
Okay, so they're technically not there, so it would still be like the 68
Yep.
you're still at, technically.
60, and I'm happy to report, as far as I know, one of our apprentices passed their test this last Friday. So that's one more towards it.
It's good news. It's
Sweet.
very good news.
All right, thanks.
Okay. Additional questions for Chief Cobb? Carol?
Thank you. With that additional overtime, I mean, if we go back to the fire staffing and calls for service, the calls for service, though, have been continually increasing, right? So would that be part of the overtime too, maybe, the difference? Because it looks like from year to year, it's not gone down. You've had,
Correct.
okay.
I don't know that would affect overtime because we do run at a minimum. We can't just have people call in sick or be on sick leave or on light duty or whatever the case may be and not staff the trucks at a minimum. So we do have a minimum staffing where if that happens, we call people in or mandate overtime. Otherwise, a station might not be able to roll a rig, right? So that's kind of where that comes into place. I wouldn't say that the call volume really changes the overtime because
Oh,
it's
okay.
about minimum staffing, really.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Additional questions for Chief Cobb? Okay, seeing none. We'll move to our next presentation. Did
you like
have
me to
anything else,
read?
Chief?
I could read a little bit about the next presentation that I
I
had
think
notes
that would be
for.
great, because the next one is a segue into the revised proposals for the referendum communications from Miller. When we left last time, we had tasked them with retooling some of those recommendations in parallel with us getting some additional feedback. A number of council members wanted to talk with neighborhood groups and that, so,
Well, you
yeah,
almost-
if you want to,
You almost covered half of what I had here, so I'll just go
yeah,
on right on.
well,
Yeah, as you all recall, about a month ago, Miller presented its scope of work to the city council, and at that meeting, we heard that some of the council would be interested in seeing a reduced scope of work to support this effort. Since then, Mary Ann, Justin, and I, along with Miller team, have continued refining the scope of work based on the feedback from that discussion. The proposed scope for review today has been refined to focus on referendum education and outreach, removing the survey components and one mailer that we've included in the initial proposal. This adjustment reflects an understanding of the city's internal capacity to support communications while ensuring that residents are well informed about what's on the ballot in April. And with that, I would introduce Miller Communications.
Okay.
They're online with us.
yep, and we have both of them available on WebEx. Welcome back, James and Caitlin. Can you guys hear us here? We didn't test the WebEx communication before we
can
began.
indeed, yep.
Awesome. All right, I'll turn it
can-
over to you guys.
I can hear you loud and clear. Well, terrific. And thank you, Chief, for that introduction. I think you covered a lot of what we would look to cover this evening. So first of all, I'm James Madeline with Miller Communications. I'm joined by my colleague, Caitlin. My colleague Cass was with you last time. It is her daughter's birthday, so she is celebrating with her tonight. So we appreciated the opportunity to begin this discussion a number of weeks ago, share a little bit about our firm, its experience, the experiences that we've had working with dozens of communities across the state, working on similar issues, as well as our initial recommendations on an approach to outreach and education about a referendum, should you choose to go down that path. As noted as part of the intro, we've done some work over the course of the last few weeks to refine the scope of that education effort to better meet the needs of the community. And we wanted to just kind of walk through some of those details with you tonight and then certainly be available to answer any questions that you may have about either the revised scope or any of the other matters that we might have talked about a few weeks ago. So to do that, I'm going to hand this off to Caitlin.
Thank you very much, James, and hello, everybody. Thank you again for having us here tonight. We appreciate the opportunity to chat through this updated proposal with you all. After the last council meeting, we met with Marianne, Chief Cop, and Justin to discuss additional refinements on our recommended scope, which we can skip forward to on slide 8, if that is helpful. These refinements we made were based on conversations with you all in the last council meeting, as well as with city staff. Following these conversations, we did end up preserving the majority of the original proposal. Oh, excuse me, could you just pass forward a few more slides here? Thank you so much. It'll be the second budget slide that we get to. Just a few more. There we go. Thank you so much. We preserved the majority of our original proposal to provide messaging, website, social media, presentation development, and media relations support following conversations with the city staff. But as Justin mentioned, we took to heart your all's desire to reduce the scope there a little bit and come down to a lower number that might be a little bit more helpful for the city staff. And we did so by removing that survey option. And then in addition, we reduced the overall number of direct mailers. That figure is now 2 instead of 3, which you'll see reflected here. The professional fees and postage as well to support that additional mailer are also removed from the proposal as well. So this approach that's available in your packets is our best recommendation to help support the City of Wausau staff and provide the education materials to residents to help them make an informed decision about the referendum. And we're happy to take any questions that you all have on this updated proposal. James, is there anything else you would add there?
No, I think that covers it.
Great, thank you.
Question number 1, and I think this came up as part of our initial discussion, and then it came up with some community members after our last meeting. Those education pieces would be neutral in scope, correct? I mean, we're looking to get accurate information into the hands of people so they can make a decision one way or the other, but that material would not advocate for either action, correct?
That is correct. All of our work done on behalf of municipality is focused on education, no advocacy. It is about ensuring that there is clear information about what the outcomes look like if there is a yes vote and what the outcomes look like if there is a no vote.
Okay. Because that was one of the things that we kind of touched on in our last session before we sent you guys back to the drawing board to work on the frequency of the mailers, the quantity of the mailers, to try to mitigate some of the cost of this. But I do think there is always, well, first, a referendum is a very democratic process, which really lets the residents decide. You get accurate information in their hands, you let them decide. I think in parallel with that, there is absolutely reason for our staff to work together on a contingency plan. But I think that putting that question to the voters is really a fair way to gauge public opinion. I think we'd had some of that discussion in here at our last session. And, we know that based on 2 prior referendum questions that we placed on ballots before, our efforts, regardless of how robust, to get that public communication rolling, whether it's public information sessions, whether it's in our neighborhood groups, those approaches were not effective at reaching enough people. I think it was 2015, we had 2 questions on the ballot, and both of those questions failed, partially because all of the events that disseminated information were, I feel, underattended. I attended most of them, and they were underattended. But, we also can predict the outcome if people don't have accurate facts. I don't think we can rely on coffee shop gossip to get the facts out to folks when we know that the stakes are this high. I mean, everything that we just heard from Chief Cop, this is a public safety matter. And so we have that. I think that, I guess let's talk about that. The two questions that are really before us tonight are both yes and no decisions. Do we want to go to referendum, and do we want to put a question on the April 7th ballot to ask that revenue question, and do we want some help with the communications? That really is where it boils down. The other subject that I wanted to talk with Marianne about real quickly is about retention. Now, when we utilize those grant funds, the FEMA Safer Grant funds and the ARPA funds, ARPA not so much, but the other ones, have you been able to determine yet if there's any requirement within those agreements for maintenance of effort? I mean, are we looking at, there was some concern, I think, last week as we talked about force reduction, that we may have some clawback through a loss of shared revenue if some of those positions are not retained. And I know you hadn't had a lot of time to dive into that before Friday,
Yeah,
so.
and Jeremy, you're welcome to chime in too. My understanding is during the term of the agreement, I do have it on. Oh, okay. So during the term of the agreement, as we have vacancies occur, we are supposed to be filling them as soon as possible. So you can't allow vacancies to accumulate in the non-grant area and keep your grant fully funded. You're supposed to, because the purpose of the grant is to increase FTEs
I see.
in the organization. After the grant, there is no requirement by FEMA. Am I right so far? But our concern is, when the state of Wisconsin allocated additional shared revenue to all municipalities in the state 2 years ago, they created what's called maintenance of effort. And so each year, both police and fire chiefs are required to basically affirm with the state of Wisconsin that we have maintained our FTEs from the prior year. Now, the state does recognize that grant-funded positions are excluded from the computation. But as we've heard, the FEMA grant expires in January of 26 or February 6th of 2026. So once those positions then migrate off the grant to the one-time other revenue sources that we have cobbled together for the 2026 funding year, it's no longer really grant funding. And so the maintenance of effort usually takes place in May of each year. So the FEMA grant could be over. We have these positions that now don't have long-term funding, but we're not using grants to fund them. So I guess the question is, what happens when we certify in May of 2026 and then have to certify in May of 2027 when those 8 positions are gone? I've sent an email to the state. I haven't gotten a response back yet. But we don't actually know how they're going to perceive that change.
Right, and I think that's important. Go ahead, Chief.
I think it's probably worth mentioning also, just because we've said it before, that there is some money left in that grant after it expires in February, $600 and some thousand, right? Which we're very confident if we apply for an extension, which I was very close to submitting before the government shutdown, that we would get permission to use that extra $600,000 going into 2026 past February 6th when that grant closes, because we didn't use all the funding. But since then, I cannot get an email or a voicemail to go through or anything. So my fear would be to get into that queue once they reopen in order for us to apply for that extension. But I think we've talked about it enough that it's worth bringing back up again.
Yes, yeah. And so if that took place, that might get us past that May date where they would still be grant funded, and then we wouldn't be doing the count then until the following May. But we don't know the answer to that because we don't know if we're going to get the extension.
Sure. So there's some open questions
Yes.
there. Which really brings us to, we had asked for some extra time because we wanted to go out and network with our neighborhood groups and that. So we purposely came back in November so that everyone had time to do those conversations. Alder Killian tonight is excused. She did send in a communication, though, prior to the meeting that indicated that in her networking with her residents, as promised, that on both items, both the referendum and on the communication piece, the feedback that she received within District 3 was negative on both. And it would be her intention that if she were asked to vote on those items, that based on that response from the public, that she would not support either one. So she had asked that that communication be offered in her place tonight since she wasn't able to be with us. But she did send that in to the clerk prior to the start of this meeting. I had some conversation with my neighborhood group last week about this same subject. And I will say that the group that we had, and we did have a room full that night, was receptive to learning more. There was no, I would say, immediate negativity. I think people are interested in knowing more about all of it. And so, that there was some positive reaction to the idea that we would let voters make the decision and engage public opinion by using the referendum, which many other communities have done. I think they were interested in that level of engagement. At least that's the feedback that I got. I mean, what have you guys all heard? I guess some of you have all also attended neighborhood groups to get some feedback as you were out and about the last few weeks. Did anyone receive any feedback, or was there discussion at any of the neighborhood groups? Go ahead, Aaron.
Thank you, Chair. I can say that from what I heard from people that I spoke to in the community, the answer was resounding no on both issues. People are tired of tax. That being said, on behalf of all of us up here, I think I can speak for all of us, for all of the first responders out here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for what you do. Thank you for your commitment. When you guys began your job, you took an oath to the city and to the citizens, as did we. And I do not believe that it is within the best interest of the city to not uphold our commitments that we have made to all of our constituents, whether it be people in our districts or you guys, our first responders. So that being said, I believe that as hard as it might be very difficult to get community support for all of this. As the finance director said, we have enough money to hold us on and keep all of these people employed for another year. That is quite a lot of time for us to look at the budget, look to see where we can streamline operations, look where we can address fee schedules for our various other partners and other communities that we work with through these mutual aid agreements to see how much they are paying. Are they paying enough to the city to make it not worth our time, that's a bad way of saying it, but to make it so that we're not losing money sending you guys out here to help everyone in all of this. I believe there's a lot of opportunities yet and a lot of time in front of us before this all gets, finally hashed out to be able to see if we can get the money from somewhere else. Like, we knew the day that we got this funding, that this funding was not going to last forever. And it's just the nature of grants in this matter. So I think it would be within everyone's best interest to see what we can do within the community, within the city, to try to find internal funding, if not try to find other means that we could, keep all of these people employed, because they made an oath, or they took an oath, and they did this full well knowing they would be supporting us with their lives potentially, and I think we should be able to support them and keep them all on. And there's plenty of opportunity left to be able to figure out a way to doing this without asking the taxpayers for more money. That's all.
Thank you. I think that we had some discussion about the idea of, in parallel with this, that our staff would be working to develop perhaps a contingency plan. I think that, that certainly makes sense, but I think they have to have a well-researched approach as far as what the impacts are and what the costs are. looked at just the shell of, what the savings might be by looking at a workforce reduction, but what we did not bake into those calculations are what the potential costs are. There could be costs. I mean, Mary Ann just described that there could be impacts to shared revenue. Overtime is another cost. The downgrade of the department is a cost to the entire community. So, there's those things that I think we have to contemplate as well. Alder Watson?
Thank you, Alder Rasmussen. I guess just seeing a couple of the feedback so far from like neighborhood groups, I think it really is important indicator that how we present the information really drives people responses. You could sort of tell by how Alder Killian has spoken about referendum before, that maybe, not saying she came out with a certain bias, but same with you, Alder Rasmussen, right? You have a certain level of interest for it, right? And so I'm just saying it would be really nice to have somebody that's objective, that's not have the skin in the game like we do, that doesn't live in here, to like actually present the information in a very transparent, unbiased way. So that's why I think the group would be nice to have to help with our messaging, but then I guess it would also come down to, can we talk about these stats in an objective way?
Right.
Without any kind of, like, we all have bias, that's just impossible to eliminate. But just making sure that if we did hire somebody outside, it might give us a little bit more objective statistics on the referendum versus having it done in-house.
Well, I think the neutrality of the presentation was part of their emphasis, and I think that's helpful as well. I mean, they're not advocating for either result, but they're going to make sure that those, and that always, whenever we talk about a referendum in here, whether it's for, stormwater, garbage, or this, I think it's always important that people have accurate information and they need to know what a yes and no vote means. And I think that's where in 2015, we really, I feel like, failed in the communication, because as much as we tried to get that message out, it didn't get out, because after both items failed, I went out in the community and had conversations with people, and they said, well, if I'd have known that, I'd have voted for it. Well, that tells me that our communication wasn't all that. So, or perhaps the result could have been different. So we have that, but we have two decisions in front of us tonight where, Vicki, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do respect what each and every one of you do. My dad was a volunteer firefighter and EMT with Mosinee for many, many years, and it was many years ago he's deceased. And hearing some of the stories and what he did, and without the training that you folks have, we're very fortunate that we have trained professional firefighters in the city of Wausau. I know we have you for one more year. Is there any way that we can think of ways to increase revenue, cut costs within the fire department, but yet increase revenue for services, so that between some cuts and some increased revenue, that there could be the addition of all of these folks without increasing tax base? It's unfortunately, with all of the increases that have gone on year after year after year to the citizens in Wausau, they pretty much have their, the brakes pressed. And I think that there are things that we have spent money on that are not as important as safety. Firefighters and police officers, having those stations full. I think that we have to become creative, as we've heard earlier this evening, over this next 12 months, and look at, like I said, not only increasing the cost of our services to other communities, but how we can cut some of our costs, and maybe between the two, negotiate a way, find a way that we can keep everybody on. And I think it's going to be something that Mary Ann's working very diligently with Chief on, and perhaps public health and safety would have ideas. But I think it's important to have the safety that we need for our citizens. But I know that I'm very confident that when it goes out to referendum, if that's the vote, that it may not be successful just based on what I've seen in the neighborhood chats. So I think we have to really be creative in finding a way over this next year that we can keep this afloat somehow. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that speaks to the contingency plan. Just for clarity, we have some EMS contracts with other municipalities where our ambulance serves other communities. Obviously, we have chargebacks for those services. They're at a contracted rate. But in the spirit of mutual aid and box alarm, those assistance agreements between all of those communities do not carry a chargeback. Is that correct? Or do we charge back those hours and that equipment time?
No, what we do is we go into an agreement with the 5 different municipalities that we cover for ambulance services.
Yep.
And in that fee schedule, it's probably I think we raised it last year to 7.25% per capita.
Okay.
And then there's, of course, the billing that goes along with it and how much we recover from billing the patient and those sort of things, which is never 100%. But
Right.
I did get a graph out. I might have not sent it to the whole council, but I did get those numbers today, and I will send them out later. But there is quite a bit of revenue that we get from the 5 municipalities, but whether or not it's something that we can raise again, and we just raised it this year, and it's a contract that agrees that every year that we continue on, it's a 3% increase.
Right, because it's got a CPI or some kind of a kicker in it for the annual renewal, right?
I think so.
Didn't it have? The other thing that we've not ever talked about in the city of Wausau, we charge for ambulance runs, health insurance companies and Medicare and Medicaid get billed for our ambulance runs. The one thing Wausau Fire has not ever charged for is a fire department service fee. That's something way back to when Chief Bushberger was here that he was interested in. That fee is largely paid by insurance carriers. Almost every fire insurance policy that gets issued has a built-in $500 amount for fire department response because most volunteer departments charge for that response when they're called to your home. So, not knowing how many of our 771 fire calls last year would qualify for such a fee if we had one. I think that's something that we should look at as well. I mean, obviously, if it's, some type of an alarm malfunction or a false alarm or you're called off halfway to the scene, maybe that doesn't happen. But in a live fire situation, that is something that, we can look at. That is also something that drew an awful lot of fervor out in Weston when they talked about fire fees. But that is something that the insurance industry is not only familiar with, they expect it. And we have never charged that. So, I mean, that is, whether or not that's something that could be researched, I think that's something that we should look at when I talk about a contingency plan. I mean a contingency plan for what we do with our workforce if a referendum would fail. And so I feel like that effort should be taking place in parallel with the question if we decide to ask it of our citizens. We need to prepare for either outcome is what I feel like is necessary. Mary Ann.
I was just going to say, there's 2 types of fire fees. One, if you go on a run for a car accident or fire, what is causing problems in communities in the state of Wisconsin is if they try to allocate their fire costs to each parcel in the city based on square footage or linear footage, that is where a lawsuit occurred. So we could easily do the billing for an actual run, but we would not likely street going to a fire fee where you're basically recovering all of your costs on a per square footage, like a stormwater utility,
Right.
A street lighting fee. I mean, communities are really getting quite creative in all of their fees, but their residents are paying for it. And we've talked about that, the differences here at the city of Wausau where the taxpayers are paying everything in their real estate taxes based on their property value versus other communities where their garbage is paid separately. It's a flat fee per household, regardless of your house value. Their stormwater is based on their parcel size, and typically all homes are equated to 1 unit, so they all pay pretty much the same amount. Wheel tax, I mean, those are the things that other communities are doing to deal with the budget pressures that all communities are having today. But we, as an organization, have been unwilling to look at that diversification. So this is the spot that we're in, because we have one revenue source to fund everything.
Okay, Vicky, go ahead. And then, Lou, and then Vicky, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess, I think education is very important in this matter, and I think we need to educate. I think we need to go ahead with a referendum, and then if it fails, then we start looking at other things. But I think we need to hear from a direction from the citizens of this community. I think that's important first, before we can even talk about any other fees or how any other creative ways you can use to create revenue. But, I shouldn't chuckle, but, you're going to pay now or pay later. Either way, you're going to pay. Either way, you're going to pay. If you raise the levy or you add fees, you're going to pay.
I think that's how it feels for a lot of folks.
Yeah,
We hear that a lot.
It does. And I remember when I had a motorhome once, you pay now or you pay later. You buy them used and you're always fixing them, or you buy them new and you make the payment. So either way you pay. And that's kind of what the situation we're in right now is, either way you pay. So but anyway,
costs
I'm
are
in
there.
favor of education and a referendum and then moving on from there.
Okay, let's have Alder Tierney, and then, let's Alder Tierney and then Alder Lukens.
Just very briefly, and I know that a contingency, it would be a work in progress, but I wouldn't support any fee that was placed on our taxpayers, because that's the whole point. That's what they're going to be telling us in this referendum if it fails, is that they don't want higher taxes. They don't want more fees. They feel that they have been taxed and feed to death. So when I talk about cuts and I talk about sources of revenue, I'm talking about sources of revenue like the cities that we serve, their communities that we serve, things like that. I'm not talking about putting it on the taxpayer at all, because whenever we fall short, that's our first answer, and that should not be our first answer. And
Yeah.
that's why Wausau's in where it is.
Yep. I would just clarify, my mention of the fire fee was not a fee that applies to every household like a stormwater fee would, or like a separate trash fee would. It would be a billable charge for the service that was rendered to a house that's had a fire. That happens to, I believe, all of our neighboring municipalities charge that. In fact, recently, within the last few years, a few municipalities actually raised those fee charges out in some of the rural areas from 500 to 1,000. And that then has also caused insurance companies to increase the amount that they're willing to pay. There's an endorsement folks can buy to up that internal limit to meet the costs of their own fire department, depending on who they're served by. But we see that a lot in the rural communities. Chief Cobb.
Yeah, if you don't mind adding, that the Wausau Fire Department does way more than fire and ambulance, so we'd be talking about car accidents, ice rescues, water rescues, high-angle rescues, hazmat calls, all the different things that we do that a lot of times aren't our citizens, right? Sometimes people are passing through, we get in a car accident, and obviously there's no charge unless there's an ambulance transport. Same thing with all the different other types of rescues that we do. And, I'm a little remiss that I didn't bring it up before, but, Wausau Fire Department in 2025 is a fire department that handles way more than the fire department did in the 80s, where we were just fire and rescue, right? Now we do everything, and I think that is also an opportunity depending on where we move forward from here. But I wanted to add, it's just more than just going to a structure fire. It would be car accidents and all the other things of the sort. So.
Sure. Thank you for that. I think that's certainly worth researching. If a person could come up with some kind of revenue projections based on estimated call volume, at least that would help us make some educated choices as part of our contingency plan as well. We do have two questions in front of us where we need to at least make a recommendation of some sort to the Common Council. At that point, then a decision could be made. Alder Lukens, did you want in yet for comment or no? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I completely agree with Alder Larson. I do think that it's important to leave it up to residents. I do think that education is key because right now, talking about budgets, talking about money, things are tight for everyone. So understandably, no one wants to pay more for anything. However, I think that there are a whole lot of variables involved, even like how this all impacts homeowners insurance and business insurance and things like that. So I too appreciate all that all of you do. We have an aging population. The calls are going up. I think that there are just so many variables that education and objective too, as Alder Watson had said, is extremely important. And so getting the education out there, I did not have a meeting with residents. I haven't been able to do that. I would like to be able to do that, but I do think it's important to have objective information for residents and let them learn all of the information that we're learning, because I'm learning all of this too. And so I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Alder Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I'm pretty sure that everybody here on council and everybody in the room understands that we have a clear need. I don't think any of us feels that it's not a valid need. It's quite valid, quite necessary on a number of different points. There's a shortfall. It's like $1.5 million that we're talking about, that we're looking at covering that shortfall through one method, a public referendum. And I do believe also it can be a tough sell. We see, some of these success stories that we were presented with. I have no idea what the percentage is of yes versus no votes. If you looked at, our state over time, it's great to see the successes, but I don't know how many failures there's really been in comparison. If that data is out there, it'd be interesting to see. I don't understand why we're putting this whole onus on the taxpayer. I'm not, I've poured through the budget, and it's a mind-boggling thing to look at, and I don't wish on anybody to try and make head or tail of it. But our staff and our department heads, it's their job to put together, budgets, very detailed, right down to, dotting the T's and everything else. Has there been a concerted effort of circling the wagons with staff and department heads to look at ways to address this shortfall, if not entirety, and at least in a significant manner, so that our ask of the public could be smaller, and also show that there's been a concerted effort in the city to not just, we'll just drop it on you, but we're doing this, that, and the other thing to try to take care of this. I don't know to what extent that, I'm not saying it hasn't happened, I just don't know to what extent it has happened. I'd be curious to hear from the mayor at some point about efforts along those lines to address this, rather than simply this one trick solution. So that's where I'm at, is like, have we really done everything that we could in budget process to find ways to address this?
We'll go to the mayor, but let's first have the finance director outline for us, as this referendum situation was contemplated, really, if the council decides that it wishes to ask the question, that question has to be worded and turned in by January?
Yes, January.
Okay, so
January
the wording of the question, I think, is going to define the amount, right? So That said, if there is to be some concerted effort to determine what that ask is, if it's the entire ask, if it's a partial ask, that will have to be hammered out after we make the decision that we're going to ask the question, right? So, and I think the wording of the question actually happens in the Finance Committee or within the council. I mean, I guess where that
Council has to approve.
council would approve the question? Okay. So I guess talk to us just a little bit about where we've been with an analysis of revenue sources and how we got to the referendum the way we have.
Well, I think if you recall, we have other positions that are grant funded too. So we have these 12 firefighters, and then we also have the community outreach coordinator for the police department who is working on homelessness, and which is funded by ARPA. And we have 2 police officers that were brought in for the downtown, again, to kind of deal with the homelessness issue. And those are funded by a foundation grant. So when we looked at this and we looked at, well, what other revenue sources do we have? Again, pointing to the fact that we don't actually have a lot of other revenue sources because we are funding the majority of our services to our residents through property taxes. We were originally going to bring all of those positions to the referendum. We took whatever revenue sources we felt that we could apply to these other positions, and we took the community outreach specialist and the 2 police officers off the table and restricted it only to the firefighters. Because previously we were thinking we were going to ask about 15 positions. Now, we can certainly look to see if there is additional revenue. Again, one of the struggles that we have with levy limit is, levy limit looks at net new construction, and net new construction does not equate to increases in costs. We've been dealing with almost 10% increases in health insurance every year. We have other employee responsibilities, and those alone consume all of our possible increase in the levy. And then we have other contracts that will go up, whether it be, CCITC, our garbage contract. And there's just not enough opportunity to increase the levy. And I know you're saying, well, the taxpayers don't want to pay more. So the levy limit maybe controls that. But they're really, with the revenues that we get from the state and our levy, those are the 2 main components that we fund our operations out of. So, if we want to cut back, we have to cut back from someplace. Because if you can't find new revenues or you're unwilling to implement new revenues, you have to cut back. But again, as this progressed, these 12 firefighters, it was contemplated at multiple meetings of the council. It was approved unanimously by the council at the time. I think there were 2 people absent.
That's
All
correct.
the other people in session, all other 9, voted in favor of bringing these 2 on. During the presentations, there was discussion about going to referendum, that other communities had gone to referendum after their SAFER grant expired. And so I think, as a community, and even last year during the budget process, we talked about going to referendum in April of 2025. Am I in the right year?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. God, I have so many years going
It's
on right now,
right,
and
yeah.
I'm old.
No,
So,
you are right.
Sorry. We talked about that, and we thought we could limp through this year, and we would go to 2026. So it's not like we haven't been talking about referendum. That message on the referendum, I feel like, has been consistent. But we can certainly explore other options. But, obviously, when we look at the 2026 budget, we enforced vacancies wherever we could. I mean, the city attorney's office, fire, parks, police, there was what's that? Customer service, yep. There's a lot of vacancies that we are not allowing people to fill to try to balance the budget for 2026. So, my crystal ball says it's not going to get any easier, but
Okay, there's that. And so that, I guess, brings us kind of to where we were talking about the crafting of some kind of contingency plan. If we're going to look for alternate revenue sources, we're going to look for new revenue sources. Obviously, we can look at the contracts for service that serve the fire department and the adjacent communities. I think we also, though, should really do an honest look at the fire run fee. If that is largely, it's almost always covered by insurance carriers, not the individual. And I think that is important. That, if you were able to charge that on something like 700 calls a year, and that fee was the standard $500, you could probably clear $300,000 with that. Whether or not all of the fire runs would qualify, whether we would be looking at maybe chargebacks for services for the other things that Chief Kopp responded to. They do an awful lot of work there. And then, maybe we need to look at what the chargebacks for those services are as well. They provide a lot of services that volunteer departments don't and can't. So I think that's important. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Neal, for the invitation. Thanks to Council, Wausau Fire, Commissioner Strasser, and citizens. I think we talked about biases. Unfortunately, the bias I bring to the table is fiscal. So, and I think most of us put ourselves in the category of not being elected to raise taxes. So I think we are obligated to look at options that don't raise taxes. If we choose to go to a referendum and it fails, or we choose not to go to a referendum, what are the options? And I think, the elephant in the room we've talked about here is how do we keep as many of these 12 firefighters on before we go over the fiscal cliff, which is a year and 2 months away. So we're talking 14 months away that we don't have to hit the panic button. So I also think it's necessary that we go into this eyes wide open so we're not in a all or nothing gamble. Because if we wait and don't consider every option and we get to April and it fails, now we're potentially down to 62. So what I looked at, all I had was org charts to work with. There's other things the finance director talked about. We've discussed. We've had directors meetings. We've looked at a lot of different options. So the one option that I thought we could get 4 to 6 firefighters in the mix under the levy would be the one page that I gave to you that saves 4, closes the $1.4 million cliff, and keeps taxes flat. No referendum and no layoffs. So this was a ticking time bomb that we put in place 2021, 2022. We have different degrees of agreement on whether or not we were all prepared for the referendum, but here we are. We hope this day would never come. Chief Kopp laid out the urgency and what these firefighters do. So in order to keep several of these, as many as possible, and I think we could get closer to 6, and maybe some of the other issues we talked about, consolidating some other efforts within the city, we could incrementally get there. But 4 for sure on the math that I gave you, and that would be to fund 4 permanently. It cuts one of the 3 police positions, and it ends the Parks contract. It eliminates 3.2 admins, total of 1.41 million saved, and that's done. You save the 4, and then we look for more as we go into the year. If we turn this, if we don't take a look at it now and we refuse to cut even a few admins, it's going to be an uphill sell. Somebody asked about what is the success rate of a referendum. It's about a 60% fail rate. We saw some successes. We saw 1 failure up there. And that really depends a lot on what they're asking for. And I think the hodgepodge where you throw everything in a mix, probably filled at a better rate, but that's just an anecdotal read on that. So if we don't try, we're going to find ourselves in an uphill battle, and we're going to have to explain to voters why we're down to 62 when we could have had 67 today. So I'm just asking, consider this. You know, it's an option that permanently funds 4 to 6. You know, let's take that seriously and see if we can make it work.
Madam Chair.
Thank you for that. I think that, you know, in the context of staff and the mayor working together to try to formulate some type of contingency plan, some of these calculations definitely come into the mix. But I also think that, twice, actually 3 times, we've considered this park department matter. And that really has not, it's been a non-starter partly because we can't quantify the savings, because if we have to tool up to replace the equipment and the staff, I mean, there's half of it we don't own, we don't have. We've talked about this in Park and Rec, so that's not on our agenda tonight, but I think that you have to take a critical look at what the costs of the exit are. It's not only savings, it costs you to set up shop. Right now, we don't even have a facility those people could work out of. We can't even find a place to build a fleet garage. So we don't have the space, we don't have the equipment, and we don't have the bodies, you know? And so we can't just also assume that half of that line staff that they have over at county is going to just be eager to jump ship and come work here. You know, and there's some specialized skill sets within those people. They aren't just cutting lawns. You know, they're running pools, they're recreational programmers, they're turf specialists, they're running complex systems. So, it's way more than seasonal help. So, there's a lot of things that if that becomes a future discussion, there's a lot of analysis that needs to happen there. Chief Kopp told us saving 4 doesn't solve his problems. So, I think that if we're going to have a discussion and we're going to ask the public what their thoughts are on this, and then in parallel with that, build some kind of contingency plan, all of those conversations have to happen in this building. And, that's where we're at. And, I guess, if we're going to, we talk about bias. I mean, how you ask a question sometimes determines the answer you get. Maybe my bias is public safety. I'm from a public safety family. I know what it's like to have your parent go to work and hope they come back. And I will never apologize for being proud of them or standing behind them. I will not. I want us to do everything we can possibly do to retain these positions. And that is, we can think what we want there, but I think it is incumbent upon us to get accurate information in front of voters and let them decide where they're at with this. I do agree that putting a dozen divergent things underneath one referendum ask certainly muddies the water, and I think it confuses the public. I think the question that we've proposed to ask is clear. And, I think getting some help on the communication piece makes the communication materials clearer than the stuff we'd create. So there's that. Alder Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a couple question maybe for the mayor or for Mary Ann Grote. It was reported by the Wausau Pilot Review that these figures did not come from city staff. Is that correct?
Well, I think, the savings for the parks is a number. There's not a lot of evidence that supports the number. So I would say that is not a tested number. That's the number that the mayor believes that we can save by consolidating services with DPW. But, parks is a complicated thing, too, because...
Pardon me. I don't want to go to just the parks. I want to go to the whole thing because, if you're going to delete 8 firefighters and you go at attrition, as they quit or retire or whatever, you're still going to have a revenue source until that happens, and that means you're going to either have to look for alternate sources or have the what we were talking about, the referendum anyway.
Right.
Because we still have to fill that. And Madam Chair, you took away all of what I was going to say about the Parks Department, because there just isn't enough evidence. We haven't seen enough other than a back of a napkin plan to separate the Parks Department. We don't know what it's going to cost for a building. We don't know what amount of staff we need. There's just so much that we don't know. And to just come up with something time after time again without actually producing some numbers and some things for us to look at, it's ludicrous to even think about it. And as what my ex-wife would always say is, what part of no don't you understand? So thank you.
Yeah, in Park and Rec it was a year and a half ago, we talked about that, and Director Polly at the time brought some data for us as far as what percentage of each person working under that contract's salaries that the city is billed for and what they do. They have really good data on whose services and whose time we are billed for and what work gets accomplished under that contract. It's not near as nebulous as it was when that contract began, where it was a straight 50-50 split. They have way better data collection now and way better reporting now. So their billing is much easier to substantiate than it was in 1980. Alder Watson.
I guess I would be definitely more for having the two strategies going in tandem.
Yes.
So we have the referendum where we can maybe have a better handle on what we're asking, what amount we're asking for specifically for those firefighters. But then being able to look and see if there's savings, or just present, because I know we've talked a lot about having different, pulling the garbage out of the levee, having a stormwater utility, all these different options. But it's really hard as a resident to say which one I prefer if I don't see the actual numbers. So I don't know if that's possible to okay, this is, if you have a $100,000 house, this avenue that we would take would give you this. This avenue would add this to your tax. Just something that is a little bit easier to wrap your mind around. Because I was sort of thinking about this referendum, would it be an extra $30 or $40 for a $100,000 home? I don't know. But I think this kind of education needs to happen. But I also think we need to also show that we're working on our end too.
Right.
That we are trying to find savings, or we're trying to find alternatives, maybe diversifying revenue streams. It sounds horrible because we've got 4 different taxes instead of one big one, but maybe it's a lot less. We don't know. We haven't seen the numbers. We're just sort of throwing it up in the air and sort of supposing. But I think if we had something more concrete for residents to say, okay, if we do the referendum, this will happen. We have this many firefighters. If we do the referendum, we don't pass it, we're going to lose this, and this is what our tax is going to be. If we do we don't do the referendum, we have a stormwater utility, and we do our trash this way, this is what your taxes would be. Just showing the menu of options so that you can really be informed. And also, I think a referendum allows for the public to voice it. We hear from, there's only so many people that contact us, right, on the regular, or that come to the neighborhood meetings. There's a lot of people that just don't have time to attend, or watch, or email us, whatever. But they have the right to be heard, too. And having a referendum allows that to happen, right? So I think a referendum is crucial, but I also think we need to do some work on the side at the same time.
I agree. All right, with that, Alder Neal?
Thank you. I'm hearing some good things. I've heard the word contingency or contingency plan. Look into it. Any idea how you could help me and others understand what elements of this contingency plan might be? How might staff further in the budgetary process address this to create a plan so we can arrive at that number that we may have to communicate to the public, not being the full banana of $1.5 million. How can we, and I don't need the numbers answer tonight or anything like that, but what process are we going to go through to try to whittle, to try to find a way to show that the city is shouldering a lot of this burden itself internally, rather than just saying, well, the public will have to pay for it.
Right. I think the first part of that is determining what the ask is going to be, and how much of that total ask is going to be included in the wording of the question. We had talked about the fact that if we make this decision, if we send a recommendation to council to move forward with these things, and the council then chooses to approve that on like November 11th at our next meeting or whenever that is, that basically gives the staff a month to research, figure out how that question reads, what that ask is. By then, I think they also should have at least some basic research on, those revenue sources and those contracts amounts. If we wanted to look at, implementation of a fee, if we wanted to look at, some of those things, that gives them some time, to work on that. So, with that, we're getting down to the decision point. Like we've talked it all the way around. So, we have two questions that were in front of us last month and today. The first one is, do we want a referendum, yes or no? And the second one is, do we want some help on the communications, yes or no? The price of that has gone down. We see that based on Miller's updated presentation, that communication piece has gotten considerably cheaper than where it began. Sarah?
And I guess, does the 2 mailer, is that a smart move? I mean, is that like the minimum amount that would be effective? Because it looks like a page and a half page, right? And electronic presence for the 65,000.
I think we could ask our folks at Miller, who do it all the time.
Yeah, happy to offer a few thoughts on that. So we do feel it's important to meet residents where they're at, which is why we want to make sure that we are communicating across a range of channels for people, and that certainly includes online. But we do find that direct mailers to homes is a really impactful way to share information with residents. In terms of the number, that is very community specific. I will say, pre-COVID, frankly, we did a lot of 2 mailers in communities. I think as we've seen the period of voting stretch out over more time, where we have people who are voting, earlier, and then we also have people who are voting day of. It's important to be able to reach people before they start voting and still reach people when they're maybe paying attention right before an election. So we do think 2 is the minimum. We do think 3 has sometimes been more helpful in that space, but in combination with other outreach methods, 2 is very workable.
Thank you.
Lou?
Madam Chair, perhaps, I don't know how you want to do this, but could I make the suggestion that we just go around the table and go yes and yes, or yes and no?
Well, I think that's a vote. I mean, if
Yeah.
someone.
I mean, obviously, we can't take any action, but.
Right, well.
That would be.
The motions that we would take would be to recommend to the Wausau Council.
Yes.
That it either, that it move forward with, one or both of these items. So you could take that as separate votes. So I guess at this point, from what I'm hearing, I would accept a motion to make a recommendation to the Common Council that it pursue a referendum on the April 7th, 2026 ballot. Do we have such a motion?
I'll make that
We
motion.
have a motion from Larson. Is there a second? Second by Watson. Further discussion? Members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None are opposed. That motion carries. The second item, I'd accept a motion to make a recommendation to the Common Council that it approve the retention of Miller Communications for referendum communication services with the revised estimate that they presented this evening. Do we have a motion to that effect?
I'll make the motion.
We have a motion from Larson. Is there a second?
I'd second.
Second from Watson. Further discussion on that?
I would.
ahead.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I jumped the gun a little bit. I'm concerned about the amount of money yet. I don't mean to be a penny pincher, but the double mailing to me seems like twice as much as one mailing, if my math is correct. And I think that one mailing should suffice. It's a hot button item. People are aware of it, and when it lands in their mailbox, hopefully closer to election day, it's going to be right there in front of them. You're going to be voting, and here's what it is. Period. If they read it, they do. If they don't, you don't try it twice. Maybe they'll read it the second time. So it's a little bit of a savings, but I would. That's how I lean. I would not approve it as it looks right now.
Okay, is that calculation,
I would change my motion for that.
you would like to change your, well, we should know what the difference in the price is. I guess from our folks at Miller, if we were to reduce the mailing to 1, still keeping your media spend, your social advertising, your other proposed items, how much of a difference, do we have a metric on what each mailer costs? Because I see the third-party cost is
Sure.
most of that.
Yeah. So within that, the third-party cost is 23,604. The two mailers are not exactly the same. One's a full page, which carries with it a little bit of a higher printing cost. We can see if we can come up with the exact number, but it would be roughly half of that cost, maybe a little bit less if you keep the full page mailer, which is the one we'd certainly recommend.
Okay, Alder Lukens.
And thanks to Alder Neal, because it's hard because we're talking about, we're talking about going to a referendum, we're talking about money. I understand very much that, the firm, the Miller Communications, needs to get paid for what they do. But, what I'm wondering is there a way, yes, to cut costs there that Alder Neal suggested, and what about, I don't know if it'd be possible, but to help get some education out as well in the city newsletter, if that would be another way, just objective. I don't know if that would be another way to get some of the information out, as long as.
I think in our first meeting, we talked about utilizing some of that creative material that comes in for that purpose, to reproduce that and insert it as a page of the city newsletter. So really, that is kind of your second mailer then. If, just assuming if we were to use round numbers based on what we heard from Miller, does deleting a mailing save approximately 12,000?
That's correct, roughly 12,000.
Okay. So that would put you to 52,000. Let's just say 52,826. That does take us way off, way below where we began last month. Alder McElhaney.
I'm not going to support the Miller. The reactions I've had from residents is they really responded to this. I almost think it will do us damage by having a communications company do this. I think we have, they think they're being massaged, and people don't like the numbers that are looking at this. And I think that if we have a good message, we can get it out. They're going to use all of what we need. The staff has the numbers, the staff have the messaging. I think it would be much better if this came from the fire department and the staff than having a communications company do it. Nothing wrong with the communications company, but we have seen other referendums in the area go down with this, and I have heard over the years they don't like it. Residents don't like this. So I'm not going to support the Miller part because I don't think it is helpful to the city. I think that we have said over and over in different votes throughout this term at least that we can trust our staff to pull the data together and to educate. We have done that with the Parks Department. We said we don't want a parks study because we think the staff can do it. We said that with the $100,000 at the beginning because we thought staff could do it. I believe staff can do this. We will have, if we send out a mailer, we'll have to pay for that, but I think it is going to be more highly responsive from the residents hearing from our staff than from a communication company. And what has happened is that this has become, at least the people that have responded to me, this has become a sore point. So I feel it will hurt our effort, and I'm not going to support it.
Thank you for that. The motion and the second that we have on the floor, amended by Alder Larson, was to make a recommendation to the council that it proceed with retention of Miller Communications for the referendum service communications, reduced by one mailer, with an approximate savings of $12,000, which then would reduce the number before us tonight to 52,826 approximately, based on the amendments that came on the floor. Do we have additional comment? Go ahead, Alder Tierney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On this estimate that we received from Miller, there's approximately a $37,000 charge for professional fees. What would that include?
We can turn that over to Miller. I believe that's the creative service piece. Go ahead, James.
Sure. Yeah, so absolutely. So those are professional fees that cover all of the messaging, material creation, design, distribution, coordination, working with staff that are outlined in the rest of the proposal that I think we probably walked through during the last meeting. Happy to touch on any of those details. They are essentially the hourly fees that go into the staff that are supporting the team at the city. Those are pay as you go. So if there are cost savings or efficiencies that are found in that process, it's only billed up to the actual amount of time that it takes for it, but that is what that is for. So development of the direct mail pieces, coordination with the mail house, development of the posters, development of displays, creation of presentation decks, infographics, social media, etc.
So that's where we really craft the message, is what you're saying.
Correct. Craft the message, develop the vehicles for it.
I see. Alder Hanke?
I had one
Oh,
follow-up.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. So basically, we would be paying $37,000 to create the mailing, if I'm understanding, because they would be working with staff to get those numbers, to get the information, to create the graphics.
The material, yes.
Okay.
That's what I heard.
Yeah, then I can't support this either. Thank you.
Okay. Alder Hanke?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, it all comes down to perception, and if I go out to the public with a message, it's going to come across very differently than, say, Alder Neal or Alder McElhaney or Alder Killian or Alder Larson. And I fear that if we give this to staff, it's going to have that city hall feel to it, and it's going to have a voice, whether or not we intend to or not. That's just what's going to happen. And so I've also worked with enough consultants where they say 2 is the best. I'm going to have to agree with them. And if we really want to give this the best chance, I would prefer the 2. I will vote for the 1 just because I think we need the help, and I don't think we would get 2 mailers to pass. So that's where I stand. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Alder Neal?
Thank you again. Well, I referenced this, I think, in our last meeting. In my former career, I was in marketing and did more than my fair share of pitches to potential clients and existing clients for this or that program, or branding, or media buy, or what have you. And I know what it's like to sell it. I know what it's like to have it shot down. I used to akin it to having your baby shot right in front of you. You cannot love your work because you got to be prepared to see it go down in flames and say, okay, we'll just try the next time. I appreciate the interest in having the mailing to 1. As a marketer, I do believe that would suffice. I also, though, take Alder McElhaney's comments to heart. I mean, this has kind of bothered me from the get-go, that it kind of smacks of professionals using their wiles and knowledge of psychology and communication to steer public opinion. I do believe that we are able to put together a fact sheet that has the facts and just put it out there, one time to educate our people, our citizens, with the clear message and the clear numbers. I think we can do that ourselves. I am not going to support going with this agency.
Okay. With that, Alder Lukens, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I am an educator, so of course I do think the education piece is really important. I also think this is really hard. I believe in the work that agencies do. That's not my realm. But I also, right now, with the number of people that are struggling, it's really hard for me too. I think it's really important because it is a referendum. But I also think at the same time that even with the education piece going out, it's what we do is going to matter. And if I'm someone that doesn't believe this should happen, I think I'm going to convey that to people. So I think our objectivity is really, really going to be important. So I'm struggling with the costs as far as I think that could definitely be a negative right now. People that are going to be for it, I think will be for it. I think people that are kind of on the fence might really right now where we are, just with costs of everything, I think a lot of people might, it could be a negative. So with what Alder McElhaney said too. So what I would like is some time to think about this and then vote, but I don't know that, I probably can't have that. So I don't know that I can vote for this right
We
now.
have that time because all we're sending is a recommendation to council and the council makes the final decision. So there is no spend today. So that item, whether it comes on a, mixed recommendation or whatever, the council still gets that item to hash over the second time because we don't make any final decisions here. So you have at least 2 weeks or is it, were you going to take it for the 11th? Okay, so we have a week and a day, basically, but where that takes us,
I could vote to send it to council. That'll give me
And-
time to
and then
think
make your
about it.
decision next
But I
week.
do think
correct.
that is really something we need to think
You would
about.
have that time. Alder Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to add that, I can respect what everybody said, and I'm against spending unnecessary money just as much as everybody else here, but I do think that this, even if we just go with one mailing with this company, I do think that we need an independent, unbiased look at this approach to send to our constituents. I'm afraid if this gets crafted by city staff, it can become too biased.
I agree. I appreciate your remarks and Alder Hinkey's about the neutrality of the materials. I think that is key. We should not be advocating for one decision or the other. We need to let those materials be created independently. I also think that, the comment that, if every one of us, 11, goes out and has a conversation in the community, you will come out with 11 different takes on the situation. And the results could mirror that as well. So that said, I think that some help on the communication side, just knowing how those last 2 referendums went and what that communication looked like, I believe we need that help, and we need it from a neutral party. So go ahead, Carol.
Thanks. Well, and they said it's a pay-as-you-go.
That's correct.
Correct.
So there could be
we
savings.
can, so that's, I do think it's wise to have some help, but, right, I just think it's really going to be important. And my question is, where does the money come from
What
that
is the
would pay
fund
for
source
this?
for the?
Just out of reserves.
Okay,
Out of reserves.
Okay.
thank you.
So that is cash on hand, though?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So with that, and I think also under those contracts as well, sometimes there's a travel and consulting component. We've worked on some of our other contracts to try to do more with video conferencing to mitigate travel expense and things, if that's an option here. I mean, obviously, they would be able to employ that with the staff, so there's that piece as well. I mean, especially on a pay-as-you-go. So with that, we had a motion and a second on the floor to recommend to the council that they accept this communication piece amended to include one mailing at an approximate savings of $12,000 is where we left off. Seeing no further comment, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No. Okay, so let the record record 2 noes, 3 noes. To be clear. We're gonna roll call this because we need an accurate count and I can't discern whose voice is who. We're gonna revote. Members in favor, the clerk will call the roll.
I'll just go through everyone.
That's yes, please.
Alder Lukens,
Aye.
Alder Neal,
No.
Alder Reiner,
No.
Alder McElhaney. No. Alder Rasmussen,
Aye.
Alder Watson,
Aye.
Alder Tierney,
No.
Alder Larson,
Aye.
Alder Hanky.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-4.
We'll take that forward to our next council meeting. That will allow the members who weren't here tonight to weigh in as well. That is, let me switch back to our agenda because my screen froze. That is the last item on our agenda for tonight, so I'd accept a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Motion from Watson, second from Henke. Members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? No one's ever opposed to adjournment. Thank you, everyone. Thank you also, firefighters, for joining us tonight and for sticking with us.